Come see us doing live shows. We'll be in Los Angeles, Honolulu, Baltimore, Atlantic City, Cohoes, New York, Providence, Rhode Island. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets, and only jimmydore.com. Hey, so there's the Inspector General. They did a report, an investigation on January 6th. It's a whitewash, but they do make some admissions.
Really?
Okay. Yeah, remember how we said that there was my theory, which has been proven, is it was an FBI psyop instigated by them, and it was in order to make sure that Donald Trump couldn't run for president again. And that's
Great job.
That's exactly what the Colorado Supreme Court said. They said, he tried to do an insurrection, and because of the 14th Amendment, and of course it got overturned by the Supreme Court, but that was the plan. The plan was to make sure, and they did the same thing to Bolsonaro in Brazil, and probably the same CIA. So that's why they don't cover that here in the United States, because they don't want people noticing the similarities. They did the same thing to Bolsonaro, the Trump of Brazil, that they did to Trump here. And so, but they're so bad at it, they couldn't even get Trump. They couldn't even convict him of it. But they did try to criminalize and demonize his political movement, which is MAGA.
Yeah.
And so now they came out with this, and here's the big admission. Greg Price says the FBI had 26 confidential human sources at the Capitol on January 6th, including 4 who entered the Capitol building and 13 who entered the restricted area around the Capitol, according to a just-released Department of Justice Inspector General report. So I won't read you go through that, but that's the gist.
It means, by the way, that means they had 52 at least. You got to use the Carlito's
They had
principle.
hundreds.
Yeah.
They had hundreds. They bust them in. Paid agitators. And here's Thomas Massey. For years, I was called a conspiracy theorist for asking Garland, Wray, and Horowitz whether government assets participated in January 6th. Yesterday, I was vindicated. The Department of Justice Inspector General report confirms there were FBI confidential human sources in the crowd entering the Capitol and breaking laws. They were also inside. There are also cops and FBI assets inside the Capitol before the riot ever started, change their clothes, dress up as MAGA, and then guide the protesters to Nancy Pelosi's office, to Mitch McConnell's office.
Yeah.
And how do I know?
The woman in charge of DC Police got a plum job at Berkeley through
That's
Nancy
right.
Pelosi.
And so here's Clay Higgins, who investigated this, former law enforcement congressman now for at least 7 or 8 years. And here's what he had to say about it.
We're gradually, professionally rolling that evidence out.
You sort of answered the question right there in larger terms. You just said that elements within the federal government, I assume law enforcement, intel, and military, and I'm using your words, lured Americans to Washington into what you called a trap.
Yes, sir.
So that's a shocking, and I assume that's a sober conclusion based on the evidence. That's what you're saying.
So they lured the people there, the most easily influenced people they knew. They made sure they lured them to Washington, D.C., and then incited them to cause a riot that they then characterized as an insurrection. Again, none of them had guns. No guns. No cops were killed. No guns. And they were let into the Capitol by the cops. And then other FBI assets then directed them where to go. Here we go.
That would be my sober assessment as an investigator. And I love my country, and I've always been a staunch defender of the thin blue line, and I would proudly count the FBI amongst that number.
So he's got more to say.
6.
I want to go back to something you said in the first sentence, which is you have seen evidence, and that's spurred your questions to Chris Wray, that there were FBI assets dressed as Trump supporters within the Capitol. So that is proof of entrapment, because of course the federal government could have prevented entry into the Capitol building. There aren't that many doors. You work there, you know. But they allowed people in on purpose to entrap them. That's what that proves, I think. Does it not?
Well, it's certainly condemning. It's another piece of the strategy that the government employed to sort of complete the entrapment of Americans that they had infiltrated and then prodded and provoked online with those original seeds planted of actions like, what type of gear to wear and just in language that incited behavior that could go the wrong way, pushing actions of legal and legitimate peaceful protests to an edge where those Americans would likely not have gone had they not been encouraged by the FBI plant amongst their number that they didn't know was there. So by the time it was actually J6 and you had masses of Americans assembled outside the Capitol, almost like 99.9%, 100% peaceful on the inside.
And that's the story that never gets told. 99 to almost 100% peaceful. I mean, look how massive. Wait till you see more pictures. How massive the protest was, and with just a handful of people made it into the Capitol, and even a smaller number of people were violent. But that's all they showed you.
Had FBI assets dressed as Trump supporters that knew their way around the Capitol
before the doors even open.
Before the doors open, or else how are you going to get around the Capitol? You've been there many times. You need a guide to get from whatever door you go in.
It's a labyrinth.
It's a maze inside there. So that's right.
So they had FBI assets. A lot of people say they were cops.
I do.
Dressed up as MAGA supporters, waiting inside the Capitol to take the protesters once the cops let them in, to show them where to go. He says because it's a labyrinth in there.
I don't believe any normal protester did any violence whatsoever. I think it was the feds and then their cutout groups like, your Antifa types that are federal things to start trouble, because these are people that really believe in cops.
Yes.
They would never touch a sacred cop. They didn't bring guns because of that, because they have no quarrel with cops.
That's
they
right.
love cops. How do we not remember this? BLM just happened. These are the people that like cops. So there's no way they did that. It was all done by assets. There's you're not going to convince me otherwise unless you got some kind of real evidence. And the default should be you think the feds did it.
No way. Just Americans, most of which have never been to the Capitol. There's no way they can come in some random door that gets opened and then get their way directly to the statuary or the House chamber or the Senate chamber. It's just not possible. So the FBI assets that were dressed as Trump supporters that were inside the Capitol were there, I believe, and evidence indicates that they were there to specifically wave in the Trump supporters that had gathered outside the Capitol, and the doors open and they were allowed in. And on the inside were there's some more Trump supporters, but really those were FBI assets, law enforcement assets that knew their way around the Capitol. And they waved those guys in, said, come on, follow us. And they're the ones that led them on the path directly. Man, how do you think a guy's never been to the Capitol, gonna come into the Capitol all amped up on emotion and make his way straight to Nancy Pelosi's office? Come on. It's like, I couldn't get it. There's no way. I've been there for 7 years. You'd come in some random door at the Capitol and make my way to Nancy Pelosi.
Everything is unmarked. I mean, those leadership offices are unmarked. So how would you know
it's confusing to get around in the Capitol. Every American that has been there knows this. When you go on a tour, you bring your family to D.C., you go through the Capitol, you have to have a guide. And on January 6th, the guides were FBI assets, the law enforcement assets, and they were dressed as Trump supporters. They were positioned inside the Capitol prior to the doors being open so that the Americans that had assembled outside the Capitol, once allowed in, could be brought directly to the areas where the FBI and the DOJ and the deep state actors knew would be the most sort of condemning criminal action of Americans being inside the Capitol, protesting without permit and things. So they knew it was setting the stage for arrest and prosecution.
It's such a crime. Who planned this, do you think?
I think factions planned this. I wouldn't say who, Tucker, because I don't think there was one person that planned this, but I believe the faction of establishment liberals within the FBI and the Democrat Party and our intelligence services to another extent, use their massive powers of surveillance and investigative assets that they have across the country, confidential informants, registered informants, non-registered informants, voluntary informants. It's a complex web of FBI assets across the country that can be activated. So if you have authority at some of the highest levels in the FBI, it doesn't take much. The faction within the FBI and within our intelligence services that would coordinate with the most extreme liberal factions within the Democrat Party that were desperate to keep Trump out of office and worked within the theater of operations, shall we say, that had been set by the COVID alleged medical emergencies nationwide and millions of mail-in ballots. There's no daylight between the compromised election cycle of November 2020 and ultimately what happened on J6. So you ask who planned this? This would be the combination of several of the most extreme liberal, anti-Trump, anti-America First factions that were in positions of authority within our federal law enforcement organizations and the Democrat Party across the country.
And when you say that there were FBI assets in the crowd, in the building beforehand and certainly outside, what's the scale of this? Are you talking like 10, 20?
No.
So now the official from the Inspector General's office, which is a whitewash of what happened on January 6th, they make it look like it was a big oopsie. If you read the report, which I haven't read it, I've skimmed it. I've read some of it. And
Nancy Pelosi said it on tape, remember?
Yes, it's making it look like it was a big oopsie, that they were just incompetent and they didn't really do their jobs. No, this was intentional. And they said, oh, well, so they can't deny that there were FBI assets because it's so obvious that there were FBI assets, and nobody would answer that question directly under oath to Congress. Did you have FBI assets in the crowd, in or out? They wouldn't answer it. So it's obvious that that's true. So the Inspector General does a whitewash, said, oh, there was only 26. There was only 26. Well, he's going to tell you the real. Here's his real number. Here's the real number.
Based upon some very conservative but like hard investigative effort, evaluation of the numbers, from putting together eyewitnesses and videos and affidavit statement and whistleblower statements and court records that have been revealed through individual criminal cases where J6 defendants have been prosecuted and smart attorneys have forced admissions by the DOJ and the FBI, but those admissions have been sealed within the parameter of that criminal case by protective order by the judge, so I can't share them, but I've seen them. So real hard, objective, and conservative estimates would put the number of FBI assets in the crowd, outside, and working inside at well over 200.
200?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well over 200. Well over.
Yeah.
200. Okay.
Like a Gretchen Whitmer kidnap plan.
Yeah.
Law enforcement. Yeah. Before you came to Congress in the military as well. That's an extraordinary number. Is it?
Well, no, when you think about the scope of the operation, if you were going to do this, you would need,
but relative to, so like when, I don't know, Minneapolis burned down, or when St. John's, the Episcopal Church across from the White House in Lafayette Square, was set ablaze and all the Secret Service agents were injured. Were there 200 FBI assets in the crowd among Antifa then?
I mean, I don't know how many undercover agents the FBI would have in a situation like that, but J6 was the final act prior to arrest and prosecution of Americans that were identified as Trump supporters. I mean, the objective was to destroy the entire MAGA movement, to forever stain the patriotic fervor that was associated with the America First MAGA movement that had won in 2016 and we believe won again in 2020. And the establishment on both sides of both major parties were determined to smash that out of existence, not just by defeating Trump, but by destroying the reputations of the movement itself, by creating this narrative that was totally false, but was heavily pushed, that MAGA Republicans, America First Republicans, are somehow a danger to our republic and a domestic terror threat. There's a whole nother story about what the FBI has done to tagging Americans as suspected domestic terrorists and following us as we travel across the country. But the bottom line is that 200.
Look how massive that is.
Yeah.
And now I know people personally who were there. We had one on the show, Jay Johnston. But I know people from where I grew up in Chicago who were there. Never been to a protest before. A lot of people never been to a protest before.
Yeah.
And my friend who was there said, Jimmy, I couldn't believe it when I left the protest and went back to my hotel and turned on the news coverage of it, how it had no relation to the reality of what we just went through. And I'm like, that's exactly, whenever you're involved in a news story, if you're in the middle of the news story and you see the news coverage, it makes you go, the news people don't know, this is all made up. If you've ever been part of a news story, which I have, you see how the news gets reported. They make up a story. They have to make up a story. And that's what they did there. And the story came from the establishment. It was a preset story. And so my friends who were at this, people I know personally from Chicago, who were at this thing, said, Jimmy, I never saw anything like it when I went back to my hotel that night and I watched the coverage of it. It had no relationship to what has actually happened. And look at all the people there. And how many people actually... So if they wanted to storm the Capitol, they could have.
Yeah. Well, Jimmy, crisis initiation is hard, as we know.
That's right.
Tony Clausen. Also, one of the useful things of this honey trap operation is once you put these charges on people of trespassing and this and that, then it's hard for them to get guns, and they can have guns taken away because you're driving out all the people that you think would be angry enough to take up arms. You can't conquer a people. It's in Tragedy and Hope, that book. Anybody where the citizens were armed, they've never been able to completely conquer them like they do in Australia and England or Canada. So it's like putting dye in the water to see where the source of the stream is. You put out some outrageous stuff, and then you see who talks about it online. You put them on a list. Then you have your agents encouraging them to
come.
Yeah, and that's how we've done that's how the FBI has busted terrorists going back since before 9/11. The most terrorism back when people argued if it was Muslim or not, I looked it up because I was curious. I'm like, well, who does the most terrorism? I looked it up, and according to the feds, it's eco-terrorism.
That's right.
I'm like, that's weird. That's an odd thing. And it's because they would create fake terror plans, find some chump, get him laid, give him money, then arrest him for planning a terror thing that they planned. They did that with Muslims. They did that with they do it with everybody, probably as long as they've been around. That's what the FBI does.
That's what the FBI does. That's their job. Their job is to be the enemy of the American citizen when they try to organize or do something.
Find a chump, get more funding because of the danger, initiate crisis, then solve the crisis.
You know, I find kind of interesting that not one of these people that entered the Capitol turned on an alarm like Jamal Bowman.
Nobody pulled a fire alarm. Isn't that something?
Well, you got to understand how easy it is to get lost there. He's not wrong. I mean, AOC, she thought she was actually 3 blocks away and thought she was in the Capitol.
That's right.
Yeah. I believe the conservative number. Personally, I think there was many more. But a number that I'm comfortable going on record with is that we believe that there were easily 200 FBI undercover assets operating in the crowd, outside the Capitol, embedded into groups that entered the Capitol or provoked entry of the Capitol, and working with FBI assets that would have included Metro Police and Capitol Police that would dress as Trump supporters inside the Capitol, because those were the guys that knew their way around the Capitol. So given the scope of the operation and the number of doors where entry was allowed or even encouraged, then the number of people that were actually outside the Capitol and it entered, we believe 200 is a conservative number. Yes, sir.
It's shocking what you're saying. It confirms everyone's worst suspicions about this. It's clearly true. Did you come across any evidence that the DOD, the military, either Defense Intelligence Agency or National Guard?
No, the answer is no. So there's more to this. Watch this.
I mean, if you clearly have men dressed as Trump supporters walking around inside the Capitol on the other side of police officers who are, to one extent or another, not engaged with them, like they're not concerned about them. Then you have a set of closed doors, like exterior doors and interior doors closed, and you have police officers positioned outside, and then in between the two doors, and then on the inside of the second set of doors weren't open yet.
What
so if you
time
have
was
video, this was a couple of videos that Trump was still speaking. Did you have confidential human sources dressed as Trump supporters inside the Capitol?
So here he is, the same guy. Seems like the sole guy besides Massey inside the Congress who wants to get the truth about January 6th. Here he is asking a question of the FBI director, Christopher Wray. Did you have FBI assets dressed up as Trump supporters inside the Capitol before the riot started? And he won't answer this question.
He was still speaking. Did you have confidential human sources dressed as Trump supporters inside the Capitol on January the 6th prior to the doors being open?
Again, I have to be very careful.
It should be a no. Can you not tell the American people no? We did not have confidential human sources dressed as Trump supporters positioned inside the Capitol.
Gentleman's time has expired. You should not read anything into my decision not to share information. Gentleman's time has expired.
We have other evidence, specific observations of police officers, Capitol Police or Metro or both, entering rooms and here in the Capitol in uniform and coming out as Trump supporters and construction workers.
Isn't that something? And this should piss off everybody. So they're playing on your hatred of Trump, that you don't care about this. But if they can do this to Trump and Trump supporters, they could do this to Bernie Sanders and Bernie Sanders supporters. They could do it to Cornel West and Cornel West supporters, and that's why I brought it up. That's why I brought it up to Cornel West, because if they could do this to a former president or a guy who's actually president at the time, that they'll certainly do it to you if you become a threat. And Cornel West is too big of a bonehead and a coward to acknowledge that fact. And so instead of addressing the obvious, Cornel West then accused me of being a Trump sympathizer. Instead
Jimmy,
of
they were already doing it to him. That's why he was
because
running.
they're already doing it to him. He's already compromised. And that's why he couldn't. That's why when he did a campaign rally in Harlem, Mr. Race Matters, black guy Cornel West, couldn't get a handful of people to show up, and the people who did show up were white.
Well, he's always mostly been for white people, just
yes.
So you know.
So that's why I tried to impress upon Cornel West that we got to come together and push back, not because you like Trump or you're a Trump supporter, but because if they could do this to him, they could do it to you. And they're going to do it to anybody who is a threat to the establishment.
You know how
and
they
that's
did
the point. That's why
Iraqis?
That's the same thing with free speech. That's why you protect the speech of your enemy, because if they can take away the speech of your enemy or the speech that you find offensive, then they're going to take away your speech as soon as they find it offensive. You need the protection of the First Amendment for speech that everybody hates. You don't need protection for speech that people like or people are okay with. And that was, I was trying to impress upon Cornel West. And it was I would say politically, the biggest letdown of my life. And I saw him in a completely different light after he came on my show reluctantly and tried to run away with his tail between his legs.
They all know this, by the way. It's a tactic because they all know speech is important when you're like, hey, you can't have some weird sexual book in first grade for kids in their library. And they go, well, what about the speech you don't agree with? So that it immediately comes out the second someone's talking about their thing. This is a tactic, and the tactic is to not follow any principle. So you sit there like a chump and explain how principles work to people that are, as a tactic, not having any. And they think that's fine to do.
There I was trying to explain to a Harvard and Yale and Princeton professor for 45 years, Cornel West, trying to explain to him the simplest idea in the world. And you cannot get a guy that he already knows.
Yeah, he's not a chump. He knows he's lying.
Yes. And he knew what he was doing. And that's when I realized that he was very cowardly and didn't have the integrity I hoped he did. Doesn't have it.
You want to go to prison for child support and taxes?
Which is why he never brought up anything to do with COVID. He never brought up that they were crushing black-owned businesses with the lockdowns, 41% of black-owned businesses. So they were firing black people in healthcare everywhere by the tens of thousands. By the tens of thousands over COVID and that experimental medical treatment. And he didn't say a frickin' peep.
Yeah. Well, he's like the black women that still voted for Kamala because most of them, let's face it, were federally employed. He's one of them.
I don't know if that's why. But hang on. Let's listen to what Kash Patel had to say about this.
Two pieces of information. Ray Epps was on FBI's most wanted list.
So you remember Ray Epps? So he was an obvious FBI asset, one of the people encouraging people to go into the Capitol.
Oh, wait, Jimmy, side note, Christopher Wray, who abruptly resigned, is because they found out he was spying on Kash Patel.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So that's why he's out in a hurry.
Two pieces of information. Ray Epps was on FBI's most wanted list one day, and the next day he was off of the FBI's most wanted list. There are only two ways that happens. You die, or you're an informant.
Tomorrow, we need to go into the Capitol.
So that guy was on the FBI's most wanted list one day and the next day off, no explanation why. And why? Because he's an FBI asset doing what the FBI told him to do.
Just like Nick Fuentes in the video. We need to go in the Capitol. They all said the same thing.
The Capitol. What? No! Peacefully.
Peacefully.
So immediately the MAGA supporters know this guy's a plant and a Fed, and they start calling him out.
Mm-hmm.
And then he tries to backpedal and no, I mean peacefully.
People were not taking the bait, and that's why they had to give guided tours. And
that's
the whole
right.
thing was basically
people were not taking the bait.
Of the Caribbean ride,
and that's why the cops had to. What part of the cops swinging the doors wide open and taking selfies with the protesters makes you think that they were in on it? What makes you think?
People think
They did everything except erect a bouncy house inside the Capitol for the protesters.
Well, if you don't do research and don't look into it and you just hate
That's
those,
right.
my comics were good comics, not the ones that I've even like turned my back on because they stink. Ones that are good, the things they babble are so stupid. You know that they have all they heard is like the most trickle down.
That's right.
Liberal horseshit. The way we used to talk about conservatives.
That's right. Well, in the 90s, that's how we used to talk about conservatives, how they don't
the
know
George W.
anything.
Bush years. I enjoyed trashing conservatives for many years. I don't want to say they're right. That's not my prejudice. It's to lean towards conservatives.
Here we go. So that's what he was doing. Here's a little bit more.
We're not here to fight, man. We're here to storm. I'm not kidding.
We're here to storm the Capitol. Hell yeah.
So there's a MAGA supporter saying, we're not here to fight. That's not what we're here for. And he leans over and says in the guy's ear, we're here to storm the Capitol. Storm.
Hey, have a good night. Be safe. Be safe, brother.
That one moment changed what we knew about Ray Epps that night, when he whispered storm the Capitol before it had happened and echoed the official narrative before it was broadcast across the nation.
Of supporters of President Trump stormed the U.S. Capitol building.
Thousands storming the Capitol.
This mob that stormed the Capitol.
Stormed the Capitol.
Stormed the Capitol.
Stormed the Capitol.
Stormed the U.S. Capitol building.
Stormed the United States Capitol.
We are going to the Capitol, where our problems are. It's that direction.
So he whispers in this guy's ear, and then this guy immediately storms the Capitol. Immediately. And by the way, Ray Epps texted to his nephew, I orchestrated this.
But you're cherry picking.
but my old roommate on the comedians I know in Hollywood will say, I'm cherry picking evidence. No, it's just it's evidence.
The thing you're making, the point you're making.
Yeah, the thing you mean the thing that debunks the story? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, here's more.
The Sanborn was Ray Epps a Fed?
So here is Senator Ted Cruz asking the then, I think, director of the Justice Department or somebody, a vice, whatever.
Some scumbag.
A deputy director of the Justice Department. Hey, was Ray Epps a Fed? And listen to what she says. Was Ray Epps a Fed?
Sir, I cannot answer that question.
Can't answer.
The next day.
The answer should be no. Why couldn't you say no? Well,
New York Times
because
said
the
he's
answer is yes. That's why you can't say no.
The Washington Post said he's not a Fed.
Yeah.
Well, you can't say what the legacy media says.
On January 6th, Mr. Epps is seen whispering to a person, and 5 seconds later, 5 seconds after he's whispering to a person, that same person begins to forcibly tear down the barricades. Did Mr. Epps urge them to tear down the barricades?
Sir, similar to the other answers, I cannot answer that.
Can't answer.
Also, the person he whispered to, he wasn't urging him and the guy did it because, as you can see, none of them believed Ray Epps. That's another Fed. Time to start pushing on the barricades.
Yeah.
That's another asset. Let me say asset instead of Fed because people will quibble and go, they're not in the FBI. Yes, I know that. The FBI contracts. But they do cutouts like the CIA.
Right. And they used Metro Police. They used Capitol Police, just like Clay Higgins said. They went into a room in their uniforms and they came back out dressed as MAGA supporters inside the Capitol. They have video of it.
Also, Jimmy, when they said they beat 2 police officers and tried to pretend like they killed them, but it was 2 suicides. Even those suicides, that's very Epstein. They felt so bad, the cops on the ground, and blamed themselves so hard they committed suicide. Yeah. I don't believe that.
Yeah. So here's one more.
There's an opportunity to learn lessons from the events of January 6th. Investigation should be considered as to the funding and traveling what appears to be professional agitators.
An investigation should be considered into the funding of what appears to be professional agitators.
Like with BLM. Like we found out the feds were in BLM the whole time.
The professional we should look into the funding. But guess what they didn't do? They didn't look into the funding. They didn't do that.
All the guys.
That guy's dead now, by the way. That guy, by the way, who said that is dead now.
From what?
Natural causes, Kurt.
Did he not get a booster?
First Amendment rights should always be considered in conjunction with these investigations. Law enforcement coordination in the National Capital Region should be reviewed to determine what can be done in a more efficient.
Yeah, okay. So here, and then how did they do the January 6th trial, which was a show trial?
It wasn't a trial.
It wasn't a trial. It was a TV show, and here's how they did it.
Thompson's committee had gathered a trove of information. The challenge, what to do with it.
The one thing that we knew was the information that we have is compelling. The thing we needed to do was tell that to the American people in a compelling way. So that's why we brought in a former president of ABC News.
Yeah, I got a call pretty much out of the blue from the January 6th committee. They wanted a storyteller. And while they were brilliant lawyers, storytelling for a mass audience is not what they do.
To bring in a guy like this who would think outside the box really did prove to be fruitful. And it was Goldston who really began to envision this as, in a way, a kind of mini-series, that there would be sort of 9 episodes, and that these episodes would tackle particular themes.
Attack on the Capitol, the investigation.
The first hearing was primetime television.
The nation is about to witness a defining moment. The first hearing before the country, the results of the January 6th investigation.
This is an extraordinary moment in American history.
When it came to that first hehearing, we knew how high the stakes were.
Is about to hold its first primetime hearing.
We were either going to, make people realize that this was important, or once you've lost them, you've lost them for good.
We were either going to get people fully propagandized into a story about what happened, or we weren't, and then the truth might come out, and that would be bad.
Wait, Jimmy, did you hear what he said? He goes, they're a bunch of lawyers, so they don't know how to tell a story. You mean lawyers in a legal case, if a crime happened, the thing you go to and not a storyteller?
Right.
You only go to a storyteller when it's bullshit.
That's right.
A lawyer is what you get when there's an actual crime that happened of some kind.
On the evening of June 9th, 8:01 p.m., the doors opened. My heart was beating pretty fast on June 9th. And it was a real question of, is this going to work or not?
All right, everybody, here we go. 5 on the line, please.
I'm in this tiny control room right up the stairs from Cannon Caucus. And we count down to the start of the hearing. And at that point, what can you do?
Here we go. In 3, 2, 1.
A select committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol will be in order. Without objection.
We wanted to make sure that this was a presentation that would grab the audience and hold on to them. Chairman Thompson loved to say, it's got to pop.
It's got to pop.
The truth?
The truth has to pop.
I mean, isn't the truth already really bad that something really bad happened? 9/11, it popped. I remember being in New York and it popped. It popped so much you didn't have to tell you the whole story. They didn't even have to tell you all the story. It popped so much.
And if you try to tell regular people in your life about this, they look at you sideways like a Martian just came down and shat me out of an egg.
Well, that's in your and my life, too, because we do entertainment stuff. If you look at the map of the election, people in your life know it's bullshit. It's only dumbass, coastal, urban, libshit places where that's the reality. But as we all learned on the night of the election, most of it's red now. Great job, Democrats.
And now, and you can't impress upon these people. They look at you. They do that stupid thing that Cornel West did when he was on my show. And they call you a Trump. What do you like Trump? This is about the corruption inside of our law enforcement and intelligence communities, in combination with the media that's owned by the same people who do you think the intelligence community works for? They work for the same people who own our media, that start our wars, Wall Street, the fossil fuel companies. That's who runs the country.
They don't help you.
They're not that.
They've done nothing good. There's literally nothing good the CIA has ever done for the people that live here.
And I love,
unless they're an oligarch.
And I love when I tell people that, there's a cabal of a handful of rich billionaires, and that's who they. Oh, really, Jimmy? What do they have? Secret meetings? They're not secret. It's called a session of Congress.
And yet, Elon Musk is just Elon Musk.
Yeah, it's just Elon Musk. He's the only bad rich guy. Not Mark Zuckerberg, not Jeff Bezos,
not Bill Gates,
not Bill Gates, not George Soros. It's just Elon Musk, who was a darling of the environmentalist climate change left because he was making battery powered cars.
Who printed mRNA for Germany for the Medevac
and
vaccine.
Now they hate him. Why? because he got vaccine injured and he wanted free speech on Twitter. That's why they hate him.
And Trump should be your guiding light.
Yeah.
Love him or hate him, it should be the only thing in your life is Trump.
Okay. All right. So just so you know, the Inspector General confirmed that there were 26 FBI assets in the crowd.
It's 200.
But of course, that's not the real. The real number is well over 200. And they were inside the Capitol, got out of their police uniforms, put on MAGA clothes to look like Trump supporters inside the Capitol. And just like Clay Higgins said, you don't. He's been in Congress for 7 years. He doesn't know how to find the Nancy Pelosi's office. How do you find those? You got to get led around.
By design to protect them in case a real insurrection happened, which did not happen. Instead of this Pirates of the Caribbean guided Disney tour.
And so you do not live in a democracy. This is not a democracy at all. This is an authoritarian. How does Chris Hedges put it? We live in a
depraved oligarchy administered with depraved indifference or something.
We live in a.
Are you thinking inverted totalitarianism?
Yes, inverted totalitarianism, where the dictator has been replaced by the nameless, faceless corporate state.
Yeah,
and now
techno peasant,
and now they run everything, and so they've taken all your rights away. Right? They can force you to get. To take an experimental medical treatment. They can go into your body and take out liquids and see if you're doing drugs. The government can't do that, but your employer can, and the employer is the people who run the goddamn government. So that's what we live in. We live in a totalitarian system where your speech is regulated, your bodily functions are regulated and mandated, and there's no democracy. Your vote doesn't mean anything. Now, even though you voted for Donald Trump and you think things are going to change, I'm going to tell you right now, things are not going to change. Donald Trump is a billionaire. Donald Trump is in bed with Wall Street. Wall Street is giddy over his choice for Treasury Secretary.
Well, even if Trump wants to do it, he's still, guess what? If we got to go to World War III for Israel, we're still doing that.
Yeah. And don't be surprised. Don't be surprised if Donald Trump starts a war with Iran, because that's what the APEC lobby wants, and that's what Donald Trump does. That's what Netanyahu wants. That's what, and I hope I'm wrong too.
I hope Trump's just tricking them, but I ain't gonna hold my breath.
They're already doing that thing that there's drones over New Jersey. They're from Iran. They're from Iran.
They have an Iranian mothership.
And that's why Donald Trump...
I'm sorry, what?
Donald Trump was running around during his campaign saying, we're going to obliterate Iran because they tried to do the assassinations on me. He knows it wasn't Iran.
Did he actually say that?
Yes, he did.
Do that?
Yes. And he said,
that's not good.
Yeah, I know. That's not good. I saw the video of him saying that. And we will obliterate Iran if they're trying to take down a politician. And that was...
So now Israel just has to fake a drone attack from Iran.
That's right.
To make
so all Israel has to do is fake it, just like I showed you in that video yesterday or the last Wednesday. Sometimes an Iranian submarine goes down, it doesn't come back up.
Oh, Tony Clausen, you're the best.
Yeah, Patrick
famous
Clausen.
Conspiracy theorist Tony Clausen.
So the people who watch the show know, but try to tell the people who watch TYT, which there's not many people left anymore.
Cenk is going all in and thinks it might be some real change.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, the populist one is what he's saying.
He'd rather be in the woods with the populists.
Or the people who watch MSNBC or CNN or most of the other news shows, or that Kyle Kalinske or Crystal Ball or all those shows, the exact same.
I like seeing disingenuous people
they all
get hosted by their own petard a lot. I really do, because Kalinski's got to go in pretzels.
Oh, man.
For his dumb shit takes. And Cenk is just like shameless. Like,
yeah,
he'll blow you. He don't care. Just let me in. Please don't make me on the outside of the... Why would you call it the forest of populism? As if that's not the majority thing.
Yeah.
And that's like some remote, like you've been
That's why it's called populism.
Yeah.
It's because it's popular.
Out of the bubble dome.
It's called populist because it's popular. That's why.
You're not in the wilderness.
You're not in the wilderness.
You left.
Come see us doing live shows. We'll be in Los Angeles, Honolulu, Baltimore, Atlantic City, Cohoes, New York, Providence, Rhode Island. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets, and only jimmydore.com.